Guerka, studied his reflection carefully, his sharp claws tracing the freshly groomed fur around his mouth. He inhaled deeply, closing his eyes to steady his nerves. For a long moment, he held the breath, letting it anchor his thoughts. As he exhaled slowly, his breath fogged the polished mirror, briefly obscuring his face. When the mist cleared, his image reappeared calm, composed, and resolute. This was it, his one chance to expose the liars and charlatans for who they truly were. There was no turning back now. Stepping out of the lavatory, Guerka crossed the length of his private suite aboard the station, his bare form moving with purpose. His ambassadorial attire stood ready on its display, regal and imposing. In one fluid motion, he slipped into each piece of the intricate outfit, expertly fastening the 25 components into place around his stocky frame. He stepped forward, freeing the weighty garment from the clips that secured it to the stand, moving to the section of the room where the outer hull revealed a panoramic view of the starscape. Guerka's eyes caught sight of the new vessel entering the system, just a few hundred kilometers from the station. Calmly, he approached his dresser and retrieved a small box. Opening it, he revealed the device for his mission, a thin piece of silver metal, shaped like a square, nestled in a harness perfectly fitted for his manipulators. The device had a singular, lethal purpose, delivering power through a series of intricate biochemical reactions, capable of short-circuiting any electronic system it touched. Its creation had come at an exorbitant cost, using elements so rare they were typically found only in museums. A shame it could only be used once. Guerka slipped the delicate device onto his dominant paw, exhaling a deep, measured breath to calm his nerves. His mind turned to the rewards that awaited him for his success, prestige, influence, and a lasting mark on history. Today, the Ruben Empire would finally humble their arrogant neighbors, and he would be the one to make it happen. 45 minutes later. Ambassador Guerka, fashionably late as always, teased Nkabla, his voice light with amusement as Guerka stepped into the room, right on schedule as usual. Among the ambassadors, punctuality was a strict tradition. Arriving late to a meeting often implied something more sinister. From illness to assassination attempts, ambassadors, constantly under threat, had learned to navigate these dangers by always arriving early, allowing them to mitigate any obstacles during transit. "I'm never late, Ambassador Nkabla," Guerka retorted with a slight scoff. "Unlike the rest of you, I prefer precision, neither early nor late, but exactly when I'm meant to be." He cast a quick glance at the airlock. "Is he late?" Nkabla, still smiling, lifted his gaze from admiring Guerka's attire. "Oh, no, he's perfectly on time. He just underestimated the decontamination procedures, first time here. After all, security's a bit tighter than at other stations." Nkabla chuckled heartily, sparking a ripple of laughter from the two ambassadors standing beside him. Just as Guerka was about to speak, the airlock doors hissed, breaking the silence as the seal disengaged. The door slid smoothly to the side, revealing a short corridor that led to the docked vessel. In the airlock stood a bipedal figure, dressed in what resembled formal Navy attire, but with an unusual twist. The uniform was jet black, and what appeared to be a noose hung loosely around his neck. The figure raised a hand in greeting, his lips pulling back in a strange twitch that revealed a set of unnaturally bright, pearl-white teeth. "Nice to meet everyone," the figure said with casual ease. "Apologies for the delay. I was just at Gaba Outpost last week, and their decontamination process was a lot faster. Are you guys using an older filtration system?" He stepped forward confidently, glancing around at the faces of the gathered ambassadors. His words seemed to catch the Ogulda, and Riliak representatives off guard, their expressions frozen in shock. Nkabla, however, was shaking not with surprise, but with laughter. The sounds bubbled up from his chest cavity, and the translator device hanging around his neck scrambled to keep up, trying to translate the deep rumblings into something comprehensible. "Oh, Ambassador Johnson, you're quite the crude jokester." Nkabla chuckled heartily, his tentacle-like appendage gesturing toward the other two ambassadors. "Look at Fernick and Gaspa. You've truly startled them. They look positively insulted by your joke." As Nkabla laughed, the Ogulda and Riliak ambassadors exchanged awkward glances, their rigid postures gradually softening as they realized the situation was meant to be humorous. Their irritation faded, though their smiles were strained as they attempted to join in the laughter, if only out of politeness. The Ogulda and Riliak ambassadors quickly realized the situation. Their initial expressions of insult shifted to mild irritation as they joined in the laughter. though it was clear they were doing so rather awkwardly. John, the human ambassador, let out a sigh and shrugged. Well, I wasn't chosen for this role because of my sense of humor, he said, offering a wry smile. He then gestured toward the 1.5-meter-tall bird-like Ogulda ambassador, Gaspa, though from what I've heard, your people are known for being quite the jokesters, isn't that right, Ambassador Gaspa? Gaspa waved a feathered wing gracefully, her voice translated by a small metallic device hanging from her neck. At times, yes, but we also know when it's appropriate to joke and when it's not, she replied, her tone measured. John placed a hand over his chest, and a ripple of color danced across his uniform, mimicking the human gesture of mock hurt. Oof, that stings, he said with a chuckle. Cabla joined in, nodding toward Gaspa. It's to be expected. Ambassador Gaspa is renowned for her sharp, direct wit, as I've heard it said by your people. John, she wounds not with a blade, but with her words. Thank you, Ambassador Mkabla, Gaspa responded with a slight bow of her head. That is indeed an apt description. John smiled and turned to the other ambassador. And you must be Fernic, he said, addressing the tall, salamander-like alien with pale pink skin. I take it humor isn't as valued among your people? You are correct, Fernic replied with a respectful nod. We prefer a more straightforward approach. Humor has, let's just say it has caused more problems than solutions for our species in the past. John returned the bow, his movements more relaxed now that the introductions were out of the way. Fair enough, it's good to meet you both. John did his best to return the gesture, straightening his posture as he faced Guerka. And who might you be? John asked with a curious smile. I was told there would be a surprise guest at this meeting, but Mkabla didn't want to spoil it. This was Guerka's opportunity. He focused on the human's extended hand, noticing the four fingers pressed together with the shorter fifth standing upright. It was the human custom known as a handshake, something Guerka had studied thoroughly in preparation for this moment. Guerka extended his own hand, carefully wrapping his 5 manipulators beneath the human's hand, while the 6th and 7th manipulators gripped the top. Just as the manual had described, the human responded by flexing his fingers and tightening his grip around Guerka's hand. Together, they performed the brief, mutual squeeze. There was a slight hesitation, a subtle pull as their arms moved in unison, before they both relaxed. Guerka felt the pressure increase slightly as John tightened his grip once more, only to release it quickly with a sheepish smile, rubbing his palm. Must have been static, John chuckled nervously, flexing his fingers and shaking out his hand. No harm done, Guerka replied smoothly. It happens more often than you'd think. Apologies if that caught you off guard. My name is Guerka. I represent the Ruben Empire. You may be familiar with our colony near your borders. John's brows furrowed slightly as he glanced toward Mkabla, searching for some hidden detail. The confusion lasted only a moment before recognition dawned, and his smile returned. Ah, yes, New Venice, John said, his tone brightening. I remember now. Apologies for the delay in connecting the dots. I'm still somewhat new to this whole ambassador thing. The original envoy was called away unexpectedly, and since I've met Mkabla before, it made sense for me to step in. I hope the colony hasn't caused any trouble. Guerka nodded, keeping his demeanor composed. None whatsoever. Your colonists have been respectful neighbors. That's a relief, John sighed. I'd hate for this meeting to turn into a diplomatic incident. Not at all, Guerka assured him, masking his inner thoughts with a calm exterior. It's purely a diplomatic courtesy. Mkabla then motioned toward the corridor with a wave. Shall we proceed? There's a festival of life waiting for us, and I wouldn't want us to miss it. The group moved forward, the exchange complete, but Guerka's mind remained sharp, knowing his mission was only beginning. New Venice, yes, that's right. Apologies for the delay in making the connection, John said, a sheepish smile crossing his face. I'll admit, I'm still finding my feet as an ambassador. The original envoy for this mission had to attend to something else, and I was sent in their place, largely because I've worked with Mkabla before. Anyway, I hope the colonists haven't been any trouble. From what I recall, it's just a simple farming settlement. Guerka nodded calmly. That's correct, and no, they haven't caused any trouble, rest assured. Well, that's a relief, John exhaled, visibly relaxing. I was worried this might be my first diplomatic disaster. Mkabla let out a deep chuckle, waving the group to follow as he led them down the corridor. No diplomatic disasters here. We're here for one reason only, to formally welcome humanity into the greater community of our neighbors, and we definitely don't want to be late for the festival of life. As they walked toward the auditorium where the celebration was being held, a 20-minute journey, Guerka maintained his composure, keeping pace beside John. His ears remained still, though he subtly tuned in to the conversation between the human ambassador, Gaspa, and Fernic. The two ambassadors followed closely behind, chatting casually until Fernic brought up a question that piqued Guerka's interest. "Why does your species wear those suits all the time?" Fernic asked, his tone inquisitive. "Some of my people have encountered humans in close quarters, often during brawls in taverns, and it always seems like your full-body armor gives you an advantage." John smiled, raising a hand to explain. "That's actually an unintended benefit. The Entech's personal quarantine system wasn't designed for combat purposes. Our military had separate armor for that. This system was created for an entirely different reason." Gaspa tilted her head, her curiosity evident. "Quarantine system? Are you saying that your entire species is under constant quarantine?" she asked, her mechanical translator converting the chirps and whistles of her speech into human words. John sighed softly, nodding. "Yes, that's essentially correct. We only use the system when we're in contact with other species or expect to be." Fernic, intrigued, pressed further. "So, where is your armor now?" "My armor?" John raised his right hand, revealing a silver bracelet as his sleeve slid back. "It's back on my ship. What I'm wearing now is a powered energy shield." He rotated his wrist slightly, drawing attention to the bracelet. "This device is part of our latest personal quarantine system, a high-powered energy displacement unit. It creates an invisible, thin barrier around my entire body, filtering out anything I expel, like sweat or even my breath. It's still in limited production, but for big events like this, the higher-ups decided it was important for us to meet face-to-face, without the need for a full visor or helmet." Gaspa and Fernic exchanged glances before Gaspa spoke again, her tone inquisitive. "But why does your species need such precautions? We have advanced medical treatments for all known pathogens. Surely any harmful organisms could be removed." Guerka watched John closely, anticipating the human's response. This could be the moment he needed to find a weakness. John, unfazed, replied, "It's because of a specific pathogen we carry, a remnant from our species' long history with disease. We learned from Kabla's people that this pathogen has a history in galactic events, a plague that nearly wiped out civilizations." Guerka's ears perked up. Could it be the Blue Omega Plague? Gaspa's translator chirped, her voice filled with recognition. Fernic's eyes widened. "That's impossible. The Blue Omega was eradicated, or so we thought." John shook his head slowly. "Apparently, not all of it. Long ago, a fragment of the plague somehow found its way to our solar system and impacted Earth. Over time, it mutated and adapted to our environment. What we know as Blue Omega became a part of our evolutionary history. The result was a series of pandemics, the most recent being a virus we called COVID-19. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. COVID-19 was highly contagious, mutating quickly and forcing us to develop vaccines rapidly. Eventually, it became less lethal but never disappeared. It integrated into our biology, becoming something we carry without symptoms. It even boosts our immune systems, but it remains dangerous to other species. That's why we always wear these quarantine systems, to protect others." Guerka's confidence wavered, a seed of doubt planted in his mind. He had hoped to expose weakness in humanity, but the story was too detailed, too logical to be a mere fabrication. "So, what if the energy shield fails?" Guerka stammered, suddenly feeling the gravity of the situation. He had been counting on finding a flaw, but now... Before John could respond, Kabla interjected with a jovial tone, interrupting the tense atmosphere. "Let's not dwell on that now. The festival of life awaits us behind these doors. We can save the serious discussions for the next Senate meeting." Kabla input his access codes, and the large doors began to slide open, revealing the vibrant festivities within. Gaspa eagerly pulled John toward a group of Ogulda near the bar, while Fernic followed behind. Guerka stood frozen, his mind racing. Kabla glanced at him, concern flashing across his features. "You all right, Guerka? You look like you've seen a ghost." Guerka blinked, his vision blurring slightly. His nose twitched as a subtle moisture began to trickle. Was it fear or something else? "Hey, you okay?" Kabla asked, stepping closer. "Your nose looks a little runny." It's the latest in our personal quarantine technology, John explained, raising his wrist to show the sleek device. It's a high-powered string-wave energy displacement unit, designed to create a barely perceptible barrier around my entire body, from the top of my head to the soles of my feet. This device manages everything: its power source and how it filters the air around me, constantly removing all my bodily excretions, sweat, breath, and everything in between. It's still in limited production, but for an event this important, the higher-ups thought it best that we meet face-to-face, without the need for helmets or heavy protective gear. Guerka furrowed his brow, skeptical. But why do you need to wear such a device at all? Our galaxy offers the most advanced medical treatments to all sentient species, yours included. We all carry pathogens native to our worlds, but they're manageable, even beneficial in some cases. Surely your people could eliminate any harmful organisms without resorting to such extremes? He was fishing for a weakness, a flaw in the human's reasoning, hoping to poke a hole in the explanation. Ah, I see, John began. Well, it's because of a specific pathogen that still exists in every member of my species, a pathogen that, as Mkabla's people informed us, was behind a devastating outbreak across the galaxy eons ago. Guerka's brow furrowed deeply, his mind racing. Could it be the Blue Omega Plague? Gaspa's voice box chirped, cutting the tension. Impossible, Fernick blurted out, his voice rising unexpectedly, startling the group. That plague was eradicated, completely wiped out. John shook his head, meeting their shocked expressions before glancing at Guerka, who was struggling to maintain his composure. Apparently, not all of it, John said, his tone steady but somber. According to historians, the Ilian Dominion, the originators of the plague, launched a final attack with a capsule containing the Blue Omega Plague. The capsule, however, veered off course by who knows how many light-years and ended up in orbit around my home star. The high speed at which it traveled caused it to be captured by our gas giant, Saturn. A fragment of the capsule broke off from the main body and drifted further into our system. The main capsule remained as one of Saturn's moons, which we named Hyperion long before we understood its true origin. That fragment, however, was pulled in by Earth's gravity and impacted somewhere in what is now the Asian region. This was long before life as we know it emerged on our planet. While it didn't directly cause the rise of life, it did influence our evolution in ways we're still trying to fully comprehend. When the fragment hit, the heat from the impact thawed the frozen sample of the Blue Omega Plague, forming a stagnant pool of the pathogen within an isolated, landlocked area. Without a host to spread through, the plague simply waited, mutating over millennia, becoming a reservoir of deadly biological potential. Whenever local animals or fauna came into contact with this pool, the plague mutated and used them as carriers to release new iterations. Whether it took the form of a virus or a bacterium didn't matter. The source was always the same. We just didn't know it. The result was wave after wave of pandemics that wiped out vast portions of our population before we could develop vaccines and treatments. And they never realized it until we came along to inform them. Mkabla sighed audibly from the front of the group. I still remember the day we discovered that the Blue Omega Plague had survived within your people. He shuddered noticeably, making sure the rest saw his reaction. John shrugged, unsure of how to respond. It wasn't exactly something we could control. The Blue Omega Plague wasn't supposed to endure as long as it did on Earth, but it adapted, mutating and evolving alongside us. We fought back, of course, developing vaccines as we could. But then, in the early 21st century, the plague took one last, devastating turn. It mutated into a new viral variant that we called coronavirus, or COVID-19, named for the year it first emerged. This new strain was highly contagious, dangerously lethal, and constantly mutating to evade our defenses. After the first year, it developed newer variations that resisted the vaccines we had rushed to develop. It became less deadly but even more transmissible. Eventually, it mutated to the point where it no longer showed symptoms, embedding itself into our biology. It became part of us. Instead of killing, though, it started to benefit us, strengthening our immune systems against other pathogens. However, the downside is that we carry the virus with every breath. Air filtration systems can deal with it, but if you're in the same room with one of us without a barrier, like our armor, the risk is real. We can never be in close contact with other species without protection. And what if the energy shielding fails? Guerka stammered, his voice betraying his growing concern. He had hoped this was all some elaborate lie, but the human's explanation was far too detailed to be fabricated. Even Mkabla, The usually jovial Calapan ambassador had grown uncharacteristically serious. Guerka couldn't shake the feeling that he'd made a grave mistake. His throat dry, Guerka tried to rephrase his question, but before he could speak again, Nkabla interrupted. Let's not dwell on this, my fellow ambassadors. The others are already enjoying the festivities behind these doors, Nkabla said cheerfully, reaching for the control pad and entering his access codes. Come on, let's put this conversation aside for now. I wanted to introduce John before we brought this to the Senate meeting anyway, so, let's have some fun tonight, shall we? Nkabla added, stepping aside with a grin as the doors slid open to reveal the lively celebration inside. John smiled and followed as Gaspa hurried ahead, pulling him by the hand towards a gathering of Ogaldans at the bar. Fernic trailed behind them at a slower pace. Nkabla glanced back at Guerka, who was standing frozen in place. You okay, Guerka? You look like you've seen a ghost. Guerka could only stare at Nkabla as his vision began to blur, his thoughts racing. Hey, are you alright? Your nose looks like it's starting to run, Nkabla said, concern creeping into his voice. Guerka blinked, feeling the sudden moisture, but all he could do was nod weakly as his composure faltered.